In this lesson, we're going to be looking at some contractions that are really going to boost your native sounding fluency. And that's the contractions of pronoun plus auxiliary verbs. And the auxiliary verbs we're going to be looking at today are will, are, and have. Pronouns being I, he, me, us, she, these types of words. So let's take a look at the different kinds of pronouns that we'll be using. I, you, they, we, she, he, and it. And then we'll plus them together with the auxiliary verbs will, are, and have. We're going to be looking at contracting between the pronouns and the auxiliary verbs. So I will become I'll, which we can contract even further into I'll, which sounds quite strange, but that's the native way of saying it. Okay, I think it's time that we jump into a live speaking video. So the first contraction we're going to look at is I and will, which contracts into I'll. But often in conversation, we contract even further than I'll, and we simply just say I'll, which sounds pretty strange, but it's again one of those shortcuts that native English speakers use to try and speak quicker. So if I was going to give an example, I could say, I'll head to university later. Head being go. I'll head to university later. Have a go at saying the contraction. I'll. A-L almost if we were to spell it. I'll head to university later. We could also do very much the same thing for you will, you'll, and we will, we'll. So in terms of pronunciation for you will, you'll, we can shorten even further simply to you'll. You'll. Have a go at saying that. You'll. You'll go to class. You will go to class. You'll go to class, right? We can do the same thing for we will to we'll, and then we can shorten even further to just will. Tomorrow we'll be studying super hard. Tomorrow we'll be studying super hard. So again, it's just a way of shortening and speeding up our speech even further. So let's take a look. I'll, you'll, and will. So a really interesting way to sound even more native in your speaking. Let's move on to they and will, which we can contract firstly into they'll, and then we can contract even further into they'll, almost sounding like the L, they'll. They'll really have to study harder. They will really have to study harder. They'll have to study harder. Contract further. They'll really have to study harder. They'll. Have a go at saying that. They'll really have to study harder. For she and he, we contract even further into she'll. She will. She'll. And he will goes even further into he'll. It almost sounds like we're describing a small mound, a hill, but it's the same pronunciation. He will, he'll. She'll have to go to class more often. He'll have to go to class more often. He'll have to go to class. So we've got those contractions of she'll and he'll. Again, super useful in your speaking. It's going to make you sound more native. Let's take a look at you, we, and they. And we're going to plus them together with are. So you are turns into you're. You're having a laugh, right? We are contracts into we're. We're having a laugh. And they are contracts into their, which is almost a strange contraction. They are there. They're having a laugh, right? Finally, we're going to look at I, you, and we plus the auxiliary verb have, which is used for the present perfect simple. I have, I've, I've. We have, we've. And then we have you have, you've. Let's take a look at an example. I've really got to study harder. I've really got to study harder. We've really got to study harder. You've got to study harder. I've, we've, you've. That almost sound at the end of the V to make the V sound. I've, we've, and you've. So that brings us to the end of these contractions for pronouns plus the auxiliary verbs. It's super useful to be able to use these in your speaking, and it's definitely a shortcut to native fluency. So definitely have a go. You can go back through this lesson and try and repeat some of the pronunciation after me.